What's up, Estes Park? Hope you're doing well. In this video, we're going to be breaking down Etude number 9 in the Portraits in Rhythm book. Make sure to check out the practice videos as well. There's one at 100% speed and one at 75% speed, so you can play along and listen to how some of this stuff sounds. Alright, Etude number 9. This etude is at 120 beats per minute, and it says that the quarter note is the tempo marking there. However, we are in 2/8 time signature. Again, with these kind of visually distracting time signatures, don't let that throw you off too much. 2/8 is essentially just one quarter note per measure. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 da 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 da. Right, it goes by pretty fast, so you really need to keep your eyes moving ahead of where you're playing. Otherwise, some of these rhythms can really creep up on you here. These first couple of eighth notes are marked with a staccato above them, which again means short and separated. The snare drum is already pretty freaking staccato as it is, but in order to execute this phrase, I'm thinking about having just a slightly faster stroke to get a more staccato sound. And I'm actually playing this all with my right hand, if you noticed on the practice video there. Not only am I thinking about a slightly faster stroke, but I'm also just squeezing the stick a little bit more to actually constrict the amount of resonance that's taking place in the stick to get a shorter sound. In general, we want minimal amount of squeeze on the stick to have a nice open sound, but when we are specifically going for a shorter staccato sound like that, that's one way you can do it. Squeeze a little bit harder in your fulcrum and think of a faster stroke. So that takes place with the decrescendo there, and I am doing that with one hand. And then we have some pretty straightforward rhythms here once you get to the piano. Then we immediately have to jump back up the forte and have a nice diminuendoed phrase here. Then again, we are at piano. Again, I'm playing all of these rhythms with natural sticking, meaning if you were to consistently play 16th notes, wherever that rhythm falls in the music, just omit whatever hand is not played on a given rest. So if I have a rhythm of 1 I'm going right, left, left. If I have a rhythm of 1 I'm going right, right, left. If I have a rhythm of I'm playing those left, left. Because again, I'm thinking about the 16th note grid, what hand would fall on that particular count, and that's how I'm approaching all this stuff. Then we have a nice crescendo in line 3 again with these 16th notes. Once again, anytime we are changing dynamics, and it's not rapidly changing dynamics, we can really go for nice zone changes here to allow that to take place. Once we hit the forte in the third line there, we actually have some 3-measure phrases. Bum 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 bum. That's the first phrase, and then it immediately drops down to pianissimo in the fourth line. Ba ba da da ba da ba bum bum. Listen to how those sound back to back. And check out how fast I had to move my zone there to get that pianissimo to happen. Then we have another 3-measure phrase. And a nice pianissimo response on the next 3-measure phrase. So from here, then we move into slightly longer phrases. So at line 5, when we hit the forte, that's a nice 5-bar phrase. And then we go down to piano with a 5-bar response. And then once we hit that forte in the 6th line, we're essentially just cruising at that louder dynamic for a good amount of time there. So listen to how these phrases sound back to back. We are really just doing nice, clean zone changes to get these 2-tiered dynamics to happen. So I'm starting from the forte on the 4th line. Now this is interesting because on line 7, we have another forte marking, but we're already at forte. This is just to further remind you that this staccatoed 8th note phrase is an overarching theme within this etude. You can see that we actually started with it. It came around again here in the 7th line, and it's going to come around in the final line of the etude as well. So this is definitely a theme, meaning that when we get to this forte in the 7th line, I'm actually going to treat it as an accent and play it a little bit louder than the previous dynamic I was at. So if I start from the forte at the 6th line, listen for that dynamic change once I hit the theme. Not only did I play a little bit louder, but I actually pulled back even a little bit more into the center of the drum to really make that stand out. Alright, now in the 7th line we get into these crazy dotted like 32nd note phrases here. Or, yeah, dotted 16th notes followed by 32nd notes. So these have this sort of almost swung feel to them. So that's example 1. This is an incorrect interpretation of it. Listen to this incorrect interpretation and see if you can figure out what's wrong with it. That was incorrect, and now listen to the correct one. What you should have been able to hear is that the correct one with the dotted 16th note followed by a 32nd note is much more compressed. It's much more compressed. As opposed to a more triplety swung approach. We want to make sure that these swung rhythms are staying very square within their duple 16th note grid and 32nd note grid within this. Nice and square, because then when we get into line 8, we actually have some triplet phrases. So we need to make sure that the triplets do not affect the rhythm of these dotted 16th, 32nd phrases. So I'm going to slow this down so you can hear the difference a little bit more. Here's a correct interpretation of this. I'm starting from piano of the 7th line, and I'll go a little slower. Listen to the squareness of these rhythms. So when you intermix the sextuplets and the dotted rhythms, there should be a clear difference between the tuplet rhythms and the duple rhythms. Now here's an incorrect approach. This is probably what's going to happen when you go to first play this etude, is the triplety stuff is going to kind of morph your dotted rhythm. It might sound like this. You could hear everything was following this kind of like triplety grid, right? And we definitely want to avoid that. Make sure we have nice square rhythms on the dotted rhythms, and the triplets stay nice and round there. Oh my goodness, line 9, we start entering into the danger zone, man, with all of these roughs taking place. So, on the second measure of line 9, we have what's called a 4-stroke rough. I play these at just alternating strokes. So if I were to play a right-handed 4-stroke rough, I would have to start with my left hand on these grace notes and play left, right, left, right. So you can hear the grace notes are nice and low. I'm just alternating the strokes, starting with my left hand, and the right hand is the strong one. Then we have a normal rough in the 3rd measure, and I'm just playing, again, right hand lead. So treating those 2 grace notes there as a buzz. So if I were to play like the first 4 measures of line 9, it would sound like this, a little bit slower. I'm playing both of those flams, right hand lead. If you're left-handed, you can play them both left hand lead. Try to avoid alternating the flams. We want to keep a consistency of sound. Then we have essentially a 7-stroke rough happening in the 5th bar of line 9 here. And so how I'm actually playing this is as a 7-stroke roll, essentially. but instead of having those doubles open, I'm keeping them closed. So treating them like buzzes there. And I have to start this on beat 1 because of how fast this phrase goes. Even though the release is on the and of 1, right? You have to start the grace notes on beat 1 in order to get them in there in time so the release can happen on the and of 1. So if I'm playing from line 9, this phrase is going to sound like this, a little bit slower. Sounds a little bit silly at that slow speed, but listen to what it sounds like sped up. This is why it makes sense to start these grace notes on beat 1 in order to have the release be on the and of 1. You can hear I'm just barely able to get that and of 1 release in time there, so very crucial that we're starting that on beat 1. Now, line 10, this phrase is pretty nasty here. I'm in the second measure of line 10, I'm starting these grace notes on beat 1. Same with the next measure, starting them on beat 1. The next measure, I have enough time to play this 4-stroke rough, just have the grace notes be as close to the end of 1 as possible. And this final measure, that 7-stroke rough again, I am starting on beat 1. So if I play starting from line 10 really slow, it's going to sound like this. Again, it's going to sound like this, nice and slow. So the second, third, and fifth measure of that phrase, I'm starting all these grace notes on beat 1 to ensure that my release can happen on the and of 1. One of the biggest challenges about this piece I found when working through it is the speed. So practice this stuff slowly. Make sure you write in the sticking of what you want to choose for this stuff. Again, in the final line here, we have this phrase again. We always want to make sure that we are approaching it with the same sticking and making it sound the same. And that's pretty much what's going on in Etude number 9. I hope that these tips help you out. The biggest challenge of this is the speed, so keep practicing slowly. Figure out what stickings you're going to execute, and have fun.